Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Bible Paladin, where we read the sacred scriptures, consider their historical setting, and what it means for us today. We'll be finishing up chapter 22 and reading through chapter 23 of Genesis as we finish up the story of Abraham and Sarah. He has completed his hero's journey, passed the final test, and has begun to see the fulfillment of God's promise.
I'm getting too old for this job.
Indeed, and now this legacy will be passed on to his son Isaac. And this was all summed up in our last episode in which we talked about the binding of Isaac. A very powerful story indeed. In fact, I think that has been my favorite episode that I've done so far. As you may recall, the stories in Genesis are really about family, so we will begin with another quick genealogy. Remember, Abraham was one of 3 brothers. He had left with Sarah and Lot to go to the land of Canaan as God commanded. His brother Nahor married Milcah and remained behind in Haran, the area named after the brother who had died in before the family started to migrate. Now that we're all caught up, let's begin reading about the surviving brother. May God bless our reading of the sacred word. Sometime afterward, the news came to Abraham. Milcah too has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn, his brother Buz, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Abraham's brother Nahor. His concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore children, Tebah, Gahan, Tahash, and Maacah. It seems that Abraham apparently didn't have much contact with his brother after he left. Realistically, he probably would have been getting messages throughout his long lifetime by messengers telling him about the status of his family back home. But here we have it all in a nice genealogy, as we have had before, more for the reader's sake probably than for Abraham's. A couple of things that we can note about this list. First, there are 12 children, 8 from Milcah and 4 from Reumah, Nahor's concubine. Concubines were fairly common and were seen as sort of a second wife, typically with less status than the first wife, and they were not yet prohibited by God. Also, we are told of 2 of Nahor's grandchildren as well, Aram and Rebekah. We will see that Rebekah has a very significant role moving forward. And so let's continue as we prepare to read chapter 23. The occasion of Sarah's death prompts this particular narrative in which Abraham needs to buy a plot of land for her burial. Now, it would be unthinkable for him to bury her outside the promised land. And so we hear this story about how once again his wealth and influence allow him to barter this deal with the Hittites. And we have this great story about this bartering session between Abraham and the people of the land. And it also gives us kind of a legal account of a particular purchase, which is interesting from a historical perspective. The span of Sarah's life was 127 years. She died in Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham performed the customary mourning rites for her. Then he left the side of his dead one and addressed the Hittites. Although I am a resident alien among you, sell me from your holdings a piece of property for a burial ground, that I may bury my dead wife. The Hittites answered Abraham, Please, sir, listen to us. You are an elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial sites. None of us would deny you his burial ground for the burial of your dead. Abraham, however, began to bow low before the local citizens, the Hittites, while he appeared to them. If you will allow me room for burial of my dead, listen to me. Intercede for me with Ephron, son of Zohar, asking him to sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns. It is at the edge of his field. Let him sell it to me in your presence, at its full price, for a burial place. Now Ephron was present with the Hittites. So Ephron the Hittite replied to Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites who sat on his town council. Please, sir, listen to me. I give you both the field and the cave in it. In the presence of my kinsmen, I make this gift. Bury your dead. But Abraham, after bowing low before the local citizens, addressed Ephron in the hearing of these men. Ah, if only you would please listen to me. I will pay you the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Ephron replied to Abraham, Please, sir, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver, what is that between you and me, as long as you can bury your dead? Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. He weighed out to him the silver that Ephron had stipulated in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the current market value. Thus, Ephron's field in Machpelah, facing Mamre, together with its cave and all the trees anywhere within its limits, was conveyed to Abraham by purchase in the presence of all the Hittites who sat on Ephron's town council. After this transaction, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave was transferred from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial place. The account of Sarah's death begins this narrative, and we are told that Abraham performs the customary mourning rites for her. The Hebrew also says that he wept and mourned, and he most likely would have stayed by her side for a period of time. But eventually he has to deal with the reality of the situation and buy a burial lot for her. And so he goes to the Hittites and tells them that he is a stranger and sojourner in this land, which means that he would have no property rights at this point. And this would not go against the promise of him claiming land already in the Holy Land, because this was an obligation of his to bury the dead, particularly that of his family. And this would also end up being the tomb for himself and for their son Isaac. And so before we get into this really humorous exchange as he barters to buy this land, we need to understand a little bit about the Hittite law when it comes to land rights. And fortunately, we do have access to this. If Abraham were to buy the entire plot of land, including the fields, he would be required to provide certain feudal services and pay extra taxes on it. Yeah, taxes were a thing even back then. And Abraham really doesn't want to do that, which is why he wants only the caves. Ephron, the owner, however, would benefit much more by selling Abraham the entire plot of land. So, enter the negotiator.
Hello there.
No, Abraham, the negotiator. Remember when we saw Abraham bartering with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, that was between man and God. And now we have two men going at it and trying to butter each other up, making the other one think that they are getting an amazing deal. No, please listen to me. Just the fields. No, please listen to me. You are a prince of God. And back and forth they go and trying to make the deal that they want. And yet this time, Abraham really does not get the best end of the deal. In fact, he ends up buying the entire field for 400 shekels at the current market value. We really don't know how much that would translate to, because the value of a shekel would rise and fall. But based on other mentions in the Bible, it seems like it was a pretty high price. And notice that we are told in this narrative about all of the other Hittites who were present during the conversation and purchase. They would be the legal witnesses to this transaction. Abraham also insisted that it not be a gift, but that he buys the field to make it legal, to have a paper trail, if you will, because this becomes the first of any official land rights in the region that God had promised him and his descendants. The caves still exist and have been the site of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian places of worship over the centuries. As we listen to this story, how can we find inspiration in it for our own lives? Ultimately, it is the story about the death of a loved one and how we go through that experience of dealing with it, especially for those who continue to live, while we mourn for the one who had passed away. Not much is said about how Abraham grieved for his wife, other than he mourned and wept. These words signify that his heart was torn, so that he would beat his breast, possibly tear his garments, and weep with great sorrow. There would have also been the traditional mourning practices that would last 7 days. Today, grieving can be a very personal process, and one that each person must go through in their own way. Some are quiet and reserved. Some wail and cry. Others may even lash out at loved ones. Going back to the account that we have read, we see the reality set in, and Abraham has to take care of business. For us, this would be the process of planning funeral services, contacting the mortuary, purchasing a plot of land, coming to grips with the idea of our own grave, and planning for the future. Abraham basically had to take care of all of these same tasks. Nobody enjoys these things, but for some, they can be therapeutic and keep them from breaking down into tears. Others simply need to break down in tears, and that's okay too. How we grieve and how we treat others who are grieving come out of our own faith and how we can be present to others. Perhaps we can take this time to remember our loved ones and those who have passed away and thank the Lord for the time that we were able to spend with them. And I think this is a good place to stop for today. I know that it's been a shorter episode, but the next chapter is quite long, but it's a beautifully written account about how Rebekah is brought back to Isaac. And so I really look forward to reading that with you next time. Until then, have empathy for one another and do good.